Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm here with my June wrap-up. June was another great reading month for me. I read 6 books, which means I've now read a total of 31 books, which in turn means that we're halfway through the year and I'm well on my way to reading 60 plus books this year, if I keep going on like this. And that would definitely be a record number for me, as I usually hardly manage to read 50 books in one year. More importantly though, I liked all of the books I read this month, which is the most important thing, of course. I told you in my June TBR video that I was planning on reading a lot of LGBTQ plus books, since it was Pride Month in June. And I'm happy to say that 5 of the 6 books I read this month featured LGBT plus people and relationships. The first book I read in June was Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill, and after finishing it I had a really hard time rating it. I had and really still have so many conflicting thoughts on this book, and I couldn't really make up my mind about whether or not I liked it, and I guess liking it might not be the right word for it either. This book is a dystopian novel that was first marketed as a YA novel, but then later it was rebranded to an adult novel, and I can see why, because this shit is dark. I think I would have been very freaked out if I'd read this as a teenager, and I'm 25 now and I was still pretty freaked out by it. I normally hate it when people say that teenagers are too young or impressionable to read certain books or certain topics, but this book is pretty toxic, and I do think teenagers might be more susceptible to it, and I think that actually might be dangerous. The story is told through the eyes of 16-year-old Frida, who is in her final year at the school. All of the girls in this society live at this school from the age of 4 until the age of 16, when there is a special ceremony in which they are selected to be either companions, which means they will be the wives or more like baby makers for powerful women. They can be concubines or they can be chastities. And chastities are the teachers at this school. All their lives these girls are taught that their worth is completely dependent on what men think of them, and that is the only thing that is important in their lives. They should behave in such a way that men like them or they are completely useless. And of course the most important thing in all of this is the way they look. The girls are hyper-focused on looks and weight, and they have a very unhealthy relationship to food. That's what made it so difficult for me to make up my mind about what I thought of this book, because it is so incredibly toxic. If you have an eating disorder or you struggle with body image issues of any kind, I would not recommend reading this book. I don't struggle with any of those things, and I still ended up being affected by the things going on in this book and the mindset all of these girls have. I did end up giving it 4 out of 5 stars because I was pretty impressed by the writing and the story, and I was completely sucked in. I kept thinking about this book even days after I finished it, and I do think that's the sign of a good story. However, it is bleak and dark and completely hopeless, and I still haven't figured out what the point of the book is. I guess perhaps that is the point, that it is pointless. There's no light at the end of the horizon in this book, so if you don't like books like that, or if you don't feel like reading a book like that at the moment, I wouldn't recommend reading it. But if you do like dark books and twisted stories, then I definitely recommend picking this up, because it is good at what it does. After I finished Only Ever Yours, I picked up The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I'm very happy that this was a lot more hopeful. This is a sci-fi book and the first book in the Wayfarers trilogy, and I read this on holiday, and after we got home I immediately ordered the second and third book in the trilogy because I loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I think it's one of my favorite books I've read this year. It's about the crew of a spaceship called the Wayfarer, and they are in the business of drilling hyperspace tunnels. They have just bagged the job of a lifetime that will probably be quite dangerous, but they will earn a lot of money with it. That plot point is kind of a secondary thing in this book though, because this book is very character driven and it's mostly about the relationships and the problems and the things going on between the members of this crew and people on the planets they visit. The crew of the Wayfarer consists of a mishmash of different people who are even from different species. What I love about this book is that it feels cozy and warm, and it feels kind of like a small story because it focuses so much on these characters, but it also at the same time discusses some pretty big topics like humanity and how to respect other people and how to deal with cultural differences. I also like that it is set in the future and that you get some history on how the people on Earth left Earth and why they did so, and how they ended up joining an alliance of different extraterrestrial races. And I was a big fan of the fact that the humans in this book are actually one of the weaker species, and that they are the superior race that kind of reigns over all of the other races. There's quite a lot of technical space stuff in this novel, but if you're okay with that and you like sci-fi, then I would highly recommend picking up this book. The other book I finished on my vacation is Heartstopper Volume 1 by Alice Oseman. This is a graphic novel about two boys who fall in love with each other, and one of them, Charlie, is openly gay and has been so for a while at his school, but the other one is Nick, and he becomes very confused when he starts having feelings for Charlie all of a sudden, because he always thought he was straight. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It took me a little bit of time to get into it. Perhaps that had something to do with the fact that this was the first time I encountered these characters. I had no prior knowledge of them, and they did appear in one of Alice Oseman's other novels called Solitaire. However, once I got going, I really liked it. It's cute and wonderful and warm, and I'm looking forward to reading Volume 2, which will come out later this month. The fourth book I read in June is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. It took me a while to get to this book. I remember when it was announced, and then I remember it coming out in 2015, and now we're in 2019 and I finally read it. I guess I was a little apprehensive about reading this one because I was afraid it was going to be a total rip-off of Harry Potter. I've read Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, which this is basically a spin-off of, and in that book the main character writes a fanfic called Carry On about a book series which features Simon Snow, who is an orphan and who goes to a magical school and who is the chosen one. Sound familiar, right? In Fangirl, this story was very clearly and deliberately based on Harry Potter, and then it came out as an actual book, and I thought, well, can that be any good? But it is Rainbow Rowell, and I really love Rainbow Rowell's work, so I wanted to read it anyway, and I'm really glad I ended up doing that. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I think it would have been higher if it hadn't been for the beginning. The first third or so of this book is basically exposition and Simon and the others explaining what happened in the years before this book starts, because this story is basically Simon's final year at the wizarding school, and so they need to explain what happened before and how this universe works. But because I wasn't invested in the characters yet, I didn't really care about what happened before and how they felt about that. So that was kind of a drag to read, but once it got going with the actual action, I really liked it. It ended up being kind of similar to Harry Potter, but the way the story unfolded was very different, and I think it's also kind of meta about the chosen one, which I like, and I enjoyed the romance as well. I'll definitely pick up the second book, Wayward Son, when it comes out. I don't know when that happens. Is it later this year or perhaps next year? But anyway, I will read it. And perhaps I'll even read it in the same year it comes out instead of 4 or 5 years later. Book number 5 in this wrap-up is Autobiography by Christina Lauren, and I listened to this on audiobook and ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. But I have to be honest, I expected it to be a 5-star read for me, because I've seen this around on Twitter and on Goodreads and on everywhere so much, and everybody seems to be completely in love with it. And I really did like it a lot, otherwise I wouldn't have given it 4 stars, but it isn't going to be a new favorite for me, I think. The story is told through the eyes of Tanner, who is a senior in high school, and he used to be openly bi when he lived in San Francisco, but then his family moved from San Francisco to Provo, which is a very Mormon town, and his mother thought it would be best for him to remain in the closet there. His family is very supportive and loving, but it is difficult for Tanner to be bi in Provo and be quiet about it as well, especially when he falls in love with the bishop's son, Sebastian. What I like most about this book is how much I learned about Mormonism, I guess. I never really knew much about it until I read this book, and I liked how this story both highlighted the awful parts of Mormonism, you know, the kick your children out because they're gay part, but also the good parts, which is teenagers getting together to do community service and the very tight-knit community. Seeing Sebastian struggle with his sexuality and his family was heartbreaking, but I like how it was balanced by Tanner's confidence and his supportive family. I didn't really connect that much with either of the two characters, but I did like them enough. What I didn't like was that near the end, the narration suddenly shifted from Tanner to Sebastian a couple of times. I guess that was necessary to tell the story, but I found it to be quite jarring. If it had been dual perspective from the start, it would have been completely fine, but I never really like it when books suddenly switch perspective at the end. It always feels a little bit too convenient for me, as if they couldn't figure out how to do it from the perspective they started writing in. It's still a good book though, and I did really enjoy it. The last book I read in June is Proud, compiled by Juno Dawson, and this is an anthology of YA stories and poems written by LGBTQ+ authors, all on the theme of pride. I thoroughly enjoyed it and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't give it the full 5 stars, and that's because there were some stories I just thought weren't very good in terms of plot or structure or writing style, but I guess that's the trouble with anthologies. There will always be some stories you really like and some stories you just didn't connect with that much. Also, while I enjoyed reading an entire anthology about gay, bi, trans, non-binary people, I thought it was kind of lacking in that there wasn't a story about asexual or aromantic people. I think if you have an entire anthology full of stories about LGBTQIA people, there should also be a story about an asexual person in there. This was still a wonderful read though, and I'm so happy that a book like this exists for LGBT young readers to find and read. So those were all the books I read in June. I'd love to hear if you've read any of them and if you liked them and what your favorite book you read in June was. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more of me. And thanks for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye!